Welcome, everyone, to DCR Out Loud. My name is Tara McKinney, and I'm the Public Outreach Director in the Division of Cannabis Regulation. This is my co-host, Shayna. Hi, Shayna.
Hi, Tara. Happy fall, y'all.
I know, for sure. It's actually not been feeling very fallish. It's kind of warm. Yeah.
It's like fall in the morning and second summer. I think that's what they call it.
Yeah, I'm for it.
I'm still wearing scarves and drinking pumpkin spice. It's happening.
Yes, absolutely.
I'll sweat through the pain.
Well, things are super busy around the office these days. We have so much coming up in the next several months. I'm really excited about it.
That's right. And we'll talk more about some of those things later on in the episode. And in this episode, I'm going to tell you about home cultivation, and then we're going to hear from one of our business licensing specialists. We'll have Lindsey Rutz in the No Zone talk about QMS, and we'll round it out with some general DCR updates. Tara, are you ready?
Let's get to it.
Let's do it.
So, Shayna, we're going to talk to you today about home cultivation.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty hot topic, I think, among the public, and there's some confusion on what can and can't be done. So I think it's a great topic to have on the podcast. We do have an article in our newsletter, too, that's also very comprehensive. And we always want to just preface when we talk about certain things that there's additional information available on our website. And if you have questions, the best thing you can do is to call DCR and ask those questions.
Right.
We can't possibly encompass everything in our podcast here. So this is a high-level overview. Let's get started.
Yeah, let's do it.
So in the rule, we have 19 CSR 100-1.0405A, and it states that, except for good cause, any consumer, licensed qualifying patient with the exception of non-emancipated qualifying patients, or licensed primary caregiver on behalf of a qualifying patient may obtain authorization to cultivate. And it goes on to say how many plants, et cetera. And those are the things we're going to talk about today.
Exactly. And for a little bit of context, I currently am a deputy director of the section for patient and application services, but I'm about to come up on my 5-year mark with DCR.
Wow.
So
Congrats.
I was once in the call center, and I had to talk about cultivation every single day. So it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm really excited to offer that knowledge because I feel like at some point when you work in a call center, the information you share becomes like a broken record repeat. So it definitely is a topic of interest. Everyone, you hear, oh, I can grow my own marijuana at home, and it piques your interest. So we're going to talk about the high level details, like Tara, like you said, the rules are very detailed and we have them memorized, and there's definitions that go into how these sentences are formed. So this is super high level detail, which sounds kind of silly to say in the moment, but I'm going to hit the points that we get asked about the most. And then there's some additional information below, like you mentioned, the newsletter, we've got the call center. So I'm ready. Let's do this.
Let's go.
Okay. So as you mentioned, area of rule, subsection 040 is about patients, consumers, and caregivers. So everything about cultivation is within there. There are some general rules that apply to all folks that want to cultivate their own marijuana at home, such as plant counts. We call it the 6, 6, and 6. So it's 6 clones or seedlings, 6 mature non-flowering over 14 inches tall, and 6 mature flowering over 14 inches tall at any given time. And that's just a maximum. Some folks like to grow 1 plant. That's perfectly fine. Those are just the maximums. A big thing about cultivation for individuals is that you're not allowed to sell your cultivated product. So for patients, it's for medical use of the patient only. And then for consumers, it's for that consumer's non-commercial personal use. Caregivers come into play as well. Caregivers will cultivate on behalf of the patient, but these cultivated plants and the product are for exclusive use of the patient.
Yeah. And so caregivers can cultivate for multiple patients, right?
Right. So they can cultivate for up to 6 patients. And there are some sharing configurations where you can grow more than one set of plants in the same enclosed locked facility, which I'll also share the definition of here in a minute.
Okay.
But the sharing rules, they are different depending on what type of cultivator you are. So if you're patient, there's a set of sharing rules. Caregivers have a couple different ones depending on the configuration of how many patients are they caregiving for. And then are they themselves a patient that's also cultivating? And then a consumer has its own set as well. And an important thing too, overarching, is that if you have a consumer cultivation ID, you can't also have a patient cultivation ID. And that goes in reverse also. There is a bit of room for a caregiver to cultivate for themselves as a consumer, but that gets a little too detailed for what we're trying to get at today.
Yeah.
So just wanted to mention all of that. The rules are in place, as with everything, to keep us safe. And it is the responsibility of the person growing the plants to know the rules. So, we mentioned them here, but it's important to do that research and know what you're allowed to do before you actually start doing it.
And I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier. It's really like, if you know what you're wanting to do, you could call up the call center and be like, here's my situation. I'm a patient or I'm a consumer. And then we can help steer them down the right road to make sure they're in compliant with
Exactly. And I think when I was in the call center, it would often be folks that would call with a set of scenario details to say, like, if this, then this, would that be allowed? Mm-hmm. And that was the best way. I love talking to folks about that, just to clarify, because if you're trying to figure this out for yourself and you actually have the plants in front of you, it can become overwhelming to read rules. So definitely recommend the call center. We're well versed in these topics. So if it's something specific, like, oh, I am a caregiver, give us a call. We're happy to talk through that.
Yeah, because really you have to be registered as a cultivator.
Right. Which
Can you
I
tell
think
us about that?
Absolutely. And I think that is a common question we get. Is it because marijuana is legalized, anyone can cultivate? And the answer is not without an ID card that we issue. And we call that an authorization, but it is the same as an ID card that we issue for patients and caregivers, agent IDs, that kind of thing. So if you are a patient or a caregiver, or you're a consumer, 21 years of age or older, and you'd like to cultivate, you'll go to the online registry portal, register for an account. That is free. And then once you get in there, there are some application types for cultivation. And we ask for things like the address, the location of where the cultivation is going to be. And then we ask about the enclosed locked facility, which is in rule the term for the area that you would grow in if you were an individual cultivator.
So I can't just like pick a spot in my backyard and just plant it like a garden.
No. I mean, you could, but not without enclosing it and locking it.
Okay.
So there are folks that grow outside. We have seen some cultivations, but as far as the enclosed locked facility goes, there are a few key points that are super important to consider. So it has to be stationary, can't be mobile. It has to be fully enclosed. So the question of the yard, it can be, but there has to be some sort of fence or shed or greenhouse around it so that it is fully enclosed, and the space has to be locked. Within the description, all of those details have to be provided, and the cultivation does have to take place at the location that is submitted within the approved application. So in rule, only the individual cultivating, or if there's a caregiver involved, the caregiver and the person that they're cultivating for, those are the only people that should access this space. It shouldn't be, like a community garden situation or where out in the open where others can see it and access it. We see this as these are your plants. You're cultivating them for your own use. You need to keep them safe, just like you would any other kind of medication or other things that should not be accessed by children, those kinds of considerations. Just keep it safe. And then the big one, they can't be visible to the unaided eye from a public space. Right. So if you are someone that's considering individual cultivation, take that into consideration, because the not visible from a public space can be many things. But we say that the rules of having it enclosed and secured really take care of that visibility. Mm-hmm. And that probably sparks a lot of questions. So again, I'll pause there and refer back to all of our other resources, because those are the rules. There's a lot of things that could be that still fit within the rules. So if you're unsure, give us a call and we'll help you sort that out, because we want folks to have access to this, but we got to make sure that we're doing it within rule and doing it safely. So a few other interesting things that rule allows for individual cultivators is a standard possession amount increases when there is cultivation authorization, along with a patient ID or a caregiver ID. Typically, patients are allowed to have a 60-day supply of their allotment amount at any time. So if I'm allowed 6 ounces in a 30-day period, that would allow me to have 12 ounces of possession, up to 12 ounces of possession at any given time. When you add cultivation, that increases to a 90-day supply. And that is to account for any overages. So, nature is nature. Plants, we can't predict how they grow. Sometimes a plant will produce more than we intended to. And then there's also consideration for you may purchase at a dispensary and then the next week have a harvest at your cultivation. So you might, in the process of growing your own, be in more than a 60-day possession. So cultivation allows for up to 90 days, and anything over the 60-day amount, though, has to be kept locked securely, labeled with the patient's name, preferably in the cultivation space, but as long as it's, kept securely and labeled, that's all that we ask. And the topic of moving comes up quite often, too. So if an individual's moving, they just need to let us know within 10 days so that we can have that on file, just to make sure, in case anything were to happen, or if it were ever to be questioned, we could say, yes, we were aware of this move. This person's within regulation. So important to note, within the application to cultivate, everyone attests that they will give the department access to the cultivation space if we request so. And that really highlights the need to keep this information up to date if it changes in any way. So if you are changing a location, or if details of your cultivation space are changing, be sure you submit that update to let the department know so that your approved record is accurate. And then last thing, expiration dates on these authorizations. So, you apply, you get approved, you get an ID card that gets printed and posted in your enclosed locked facility, and then it's good for a certain amount of time before you have to renew. So patients and caregivers have a 3-year expiration date, and they can renew that either 60 days before it expires or anytime after it expires. But 60 days before is the earliest. And then for consumers, they have a 1-year expiration date. So up to 60 days ahead of time, and then any time after, even if it does expire, they can renew it.
So you said enclosed locked facility. I just want to clarify, for home cultivation, does it have to be at a residence?
Okay. It differs a little bit for patients versus consumers. So no individual cultivation can take place at a place of business, and consumer personal cultivators specifically have to be grown at a private residence address. So there are some limitations on that. Okay, so that basically covers everything that we can in a few minutes on a podcast.
Right.
And, I just want to give a shout out to the individual licensing unit team. They are our frontline team. They manage the call center. And, I really encourage anyone that has questions about this kind of cultivation, give them a call. They're happy to talk through things. They will pull up rule. They will help clarify any questions that you have. We can't tell you how to do things, but we can tell you whether or not it is within rule and, create that safe, secure access that we're always aiming to provide. So if you want to call them directly, you can call 1-866-219-0165 and press 6 to speak to a team member. Or you can email them directly at cannabisinfo@health.mo.gov.
That's great. Really appreciate our ILU team. And that information will be in the details of this podcast. So you can look at that below if you didn't have time to write it down there. But definitely give us a call and we can try to help you figure all this cultivation out.
We can help you on the path to authorization to cultivate.
That's right. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Shayna, for giving us the overview of that. And remember, there's always information at cannabis.mo.gov. And reach out to our ILU team.
Call us.
And ILU is individual licensing unit, right?
Right.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So today we are here with one of our business license specialists to discuss some common errors that they see in their work.
So we want to welcome Christopher Elliot to the show. Hi, Chris. Tell us about yourself.
How are you, Shayna?
So good.
Hey, so I'm Christopher Elliot. As she said, I go by Chris. But anyway, I work in the business licensing unit. And I particularly deal a lot with business change applications. And today I think we're going to focus in on the location change apps. But first, I'd like to really shout out to both of you. This is an amazing podcast, and I really enjoy. I really enjoy it as it comes out. What is it, monthly or every other month? But it's awesome, and you guys do a really good job of helping people to understand things. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being on today. How long have you been in business license services?
So I started with DCR back in August of 2023.
Okay. The DCR receives a lot of change requests. I think we have a whole dashboard dedicated to all the requests we receive. And so what is an error that you were seeing from licensees or business change requests? And what do you recommend to help minimize it? Because I'm out in the field a lot and they're like, change requests take a long time. Well, there's some reasons why some of them do take a little bit longer than others, right?
That is true. So licensees will want to ensure that whenever they're submitting their change request on the Complia system, that they are submitting all the documentation that we're requesting. And to help with that, we have the checklist. It's a business change checklist. And in this case, it would be location change, what we're going to talk about today. But following that checklist and naming your documents appropriately so that we can quickly identify what those documents are would really help in the big scheme of things.
Chris, we really like to tout our citations here on the podcast. I'm sure you've noticed. So I brought yours along. And if you're okay with it, I'd like to read it out to the people to give them the address and the rules where they can follow along with us if they'd like.
Absolutely.
Okay, so all business change applications, sometimes just called change applications or change apps, they're outlined in 19 CSR 100-1. This section of the rules outlines and explains general operating requirements that are applicable to all licensed and certified facilities. So today we're going to focus specifically on 19 CSR 100-1, subsection 100, 2D, and 3C, because they pertain to location changes.
Always fun to read those addresses, as you call them. I like that.
It makes me feel very official. So that's where we are in the rule. Chris, what kinds of errors do we see the most when it comes to location changes?
When it comes to location changes, probably the most difficult one, or that we see a lot, is the blueprints being complete and the local government documentation would be the two most.
Is there something specific within the blueprints, or is it kind of all over the board, there's just some details missing?
Well, they just want to make sure, licensees want to make sure that the blueprints, all rooms are clearly identified and they need to be labeled. This labeling needs to include the purpose and the square footage. Oftentimes we'll see no square footage on there. So they need to make sure that the square footages are put on there. The camera locations, the limited area accesses, and the access permissions need to be properly labeled on the blueprint. Probably the third most common errors often involves the documentation needed from the local government, such as your city or your county. Rule states that licensees are to obtain documentation from the local government confirming that the proposed location is in compliance with the local zoning and the local distance requirements. The confirmation documentation, which you'd obtain from your local government, can be in the form of an official letterhead or even an email. Another consideration is that in some cases, your local government may not have any zoning or distance requirements, or they may have one and not the other. Whatever the case may be, just make sure the documentation, make sure it clearly states this and it paints a clear picture. So the key takeaway here is that the documentation from the local government must always address the zoning requirements and the distance requirements, even if there are none.
Okay. That's helpful. Yeah.
That makes sense. So our licensees working with their local entities is really, really important.
It sounds like either way, if there's a location change, the licensee will need to talk to their local government or municipality to figure those details out before they submit this.
Yes.
Yeah. Because either way, they're going to have some documentation from them saying either yes,
Right.
yeah,
There's something either way.
yeah, gotcha.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yep. The local government will need to say, yes, you're in compliance, or no, we don't have any.
Regulations.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. That makes sense.
Good to know. So we've talked about blueprints, contacting the local government. I'm sure there's more things that licensees need to be aware of. What are some of those additional things?
From a lease agreement standpoint, they'll just need to make sure, licensees will need to make sure that they have a lease or other proof of ownership that is properly signed by everyone. Needs to include the correct dates. Sometimes we see erroneous dates. And so make sure that your lease agreement is properly dated. And ideally, somewhere in the lease, perhaps in the default section, the lease would identify what happens to the regulated product should a default occur. Obviously, we hope those things don't happen, but if they did, what's going to happen to the regulated marijuana product?
Okay.
Right. And there's one more error on here that we see. Chris, what's that last one?
So the last one would be missing administrative or processing fees. So
Right.
licensees have to go over to JetPay and they have to make a payment. And whenever they make the payment, they're able to download proof of that payment. So we need proof of that payment with their submission on the Complia system.
We have a checklist for this. They use the checklist. All this stuff's on there. They should be able to find that information. Otherwise, they have a designated business licensing specialist. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. That's what I do. I work with many licenses, and then I've got about 15 other colleagues, and they also do what I do. They help licensees navigate their change applications, and we're always available.
Yeah, and we appreciate you guys so much doing that.
Absolutely.
If you look in our newsletter from last quarter, you will see other common things that kind of hold things up in the system. So you might want to check out that news article. Chris's is also in there. We just want to again tell you that, of course, we don't cover everything on this podcast.
Right.
Your best bet is to always check with your business license specialist, check with Rural, check our website, all of those good things, so that you're making sure that you're getting the full story and the full context of every situation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, Chris, and sharing that information. We know that we're always trying to make things run smoother, to have these applications turned around quicker, not to delay any more than we need to just for basic processing. So I hope that these little tidbits will help some licensees get through the process quicker than maybe they did before by just looking at these small details that we know commonly can cause a little bit of a time delay to go back and forth to get the right information. So all good things. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing those.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Of course.
Appreciate it.
Hope to have you back sometime. Take care.
Hey, Tara, it's about that time.
It's time.
It's time for the No Zone.
Our monthly segment to keep you in the know. This month, Lindsey will be talking about QMS and what that means for licensees. Take it away, Lindsey.
Hey everybody, it's Lindsey here. This month we're going to be talking about quality management systems, also known as QMS. So everyone wants to know, what is a quality management system? Well, it's a formalized system of documents, processes, and procedures, including responsibilities of those working those procedures for achieving quality policies and objectives. Typically, those quality policies and objectives are focused around customer satisfaction, which that includes having a consistent quality product produced every single time. As we can all imagine, these processes, procedures set for standardization, they really are beneficial for creating something that is quality and consistent every time. You're using the same set of recipes, ingredients, identifying what range of potency that you maybe need to use of your raw ingredients if you're making infused products. So a lot of different things could be going into play here with quality management systems. So there are a few different systems out there. There are some that are specific to cannabis. There are some that are just really specific. You could use them for anything. For example, the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, they kind of outline a very broad, overarching quality management system. They even say that it can be used in any business. It will help you kind of identify what are the things that we should be looking for? What are the things that we should be measuring? Measuring is a big one that's outlined in quality management systems. And as ladies may imagine, is pretty important here in the cannabis industry. A lot of weights and measures going on.
Yeah, so I always get a little bit confused on the difference between an SOP and QMS. Can you kind of set me straight on that?
Sure. So an SOP is a standard operating procedure. So a QMS, or quality management system, is made up of a lot of different standard operating procedures. And you actually may have multiple standard operating procedures that can be used in an entire process. So your process may be made up of multiple little standard operating procedures, and your entire quality management system will be made up of different processes. And a lot of times your processes are your bigger focuses. So you'll have things, for example, HR, employee relations, employee training. Then you'll get into your actual operating procedures, how to maybe extract some cannabis or grow a specific strain. The industry is very, very robust and very interesting on the different processes and procedures that different licensees or folks across the nation and world have come up with.
Yeah, so it sounds like a really big task. To me, that sounds really daunting, but there's a lot of benefits to having a quality management system. Tell our licensees about what some of those benefits might be.
Sure. Implementing a quality management system may help your licensed facility by being able to assess the overall context of your license, to define who is affected by your work and what they expect from you. So this will enable you to be able to clearly state your objectives and identify new business opportunities. That means, maybe you're producing X amount of a product every month, but maybe those aren't selling quite as much as they used to a couple years ago. New products have been developed, and maybe that's an opportunity for you as your business to maybe rethink, where are we spending our resources? Maybe we should reallocate those to something that's a little bit more popular in our production. Another one is putting your customers first. So you want to make sure that you're constantly or consistently meeting your customers' needs. As a consumer of any products, you hope to get that same thing every time. If I go and buy a particular candy that, is out in every gas station, grocery store, anywhere out there, I'm going to expect it to taste the same every single time and be the same product every single time.
So bottom line is, it is part of rules. And it is something that licensees are expected to do.
So how does that manifest in day-to-day business for a licensee?
That's a really great question. It can manifest in a lot of different ways, but one of the first and foremost is helping businesses meet their statutory and regulatory requirements. So every portion of rule that applies to your licensed facility should be considered as part of your quality management system. Anything that is applicable to their facility, if it would be part of a standard operating procedure, for example, the rule requirements around scales. They're very specific in our facilities rules section, and that would be something that you as a licensed facility would want to implement in not only your administrative procedures to ensure that that scale is getting calibrated and certified yearly, but also in maybe your day-to-day processes and procedures. Every time that you are weighing any sort of product, how are you ensuring that scale is weighing accurately? So do you check it with a calibrated weight prior to beginning any weighing practices at your facility? Or do you have another practice that's been implemented? Whatever works for your licensed facility and also works with rule, these are all checks and balances that can be implemented to help your licensed business. You have these sets of standards and practices readily available for your staff to help them. Sometimes we're all human, and I'll be working through something and I'm like, wait, what do I do next? And so having those standard operating procedures there readily available helps then create that quality, consistent product every time. It's like, oh, wait, I need to calibrate, check my scale, make sure it's weighing as I expect it to, then I'm going to continue my practices. But however that looks like for any licensed facility, it really does help align rules, regulations in your day-to-day processes and procedures. Just overall, think about how it could be applied to not only be beneficial for your consumers, but potentially also beneficial for your processes, procedures, and potentially even your bottom line. Everything could be, there could be a lot of reduction in potential waste or contaminants, different things like that, just by having set expectations for every product you create.
All right. Well, thanks for keeping us in the know.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsey. That was really informational. I feel like I learned a lot, and it sounds like we're just trying to set everyone up for success. Will we see you next month?
You'll see me every month.
Perfect.
Okay, we're going to wrap things up with some basic updates from the division. Kick it off for us, Shayna.
All right. So the first one, a reminder as of November 1st, 2024, the deadline has passed for dispensary licensees to sell any marijuana product that does not have an approved item approval number on the label. This is required in Rule 19 CSR 100-1, Section 120(1)(c)(2)(l). Existing items at a dispensary facility must either be destroyed or repackaged into compliant packaging by the licensee to create the final marijuana product. Check out the Item Approval Applications dashboard at cannabis.mo.gov and click on the Data and Reports tile.
Micro Business Welcome Meeting will be held in Jefferson City on November 13th. Participation in a micro welcome meeting is mandatory for all micro business licensees. Registrants should include ownership, facility managers and decision makers, compliance consultants, etc. If designated contacts have additional team members that would like to attend, they will need to register individually. Only registered individuals may attend. You can locate registration link in the details of this podcast.
Next up, the division will hold a virtual licensee session on November 20th. Registration is required and will remain open until 11:59 p.m. on November 12th. The session topics include production batches, virtual transfers, and the transfer hub. You can locate that registration link in the details of this podcast as well. For questions about registration, please email cannabisdevelopment@health.mo.gov.
You may have heard through the grapevine about the law enforcement training that DCR is working on. That will be coming to us in the new year. Be looking out for information on the training on this podcast and the Cannabis Connection in the future.
Well,
what a day.
Episode 3. And we're recording this before Halloween. So we want to wish everyone happy kickoff to the holiday season. Yeah. We hope your costumes are excellent. We know ours will be.
That's right. We're going to go into Thanksgiving and Christmas. Gosh, it's that busy time of year. So I hope everyone stays safe out there. Subscribe to our email list to receive emails from DCR on various topics and customized to your needs. We have several topics out there like micro business, public health and safety. If you're a licensee, there's lots of opportunities and topics for that. So go to cannabis.mo.gov and click on Join Our Email List under Contact Information.
The Cannabis Connection newsletter is published quarterly and is your information link to Missouri's Division of Cannabis Regulation.
You can find the Cannabis Connection newsletter at cannabis.mo.gov. Click on the DCR Communication and Resource tile.
That's all she wrote, Tara.
That's all.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.
This podcast content is intended for adults over the age of 21 years old and is best to be used for informational purposes only. The content does not constitute official compliance or regulatory guidance. The department and author assumes no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this podcast. The information contained in this podcast is provided on an as-is basis with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness. Cannabis licensees should consult with their assigned compliance officer for rules and regulations specific to their facility. The content is not intended to diagnose or treat any medical condition and should not be relied on for any medical purposes. Patients and the public should consult with their healthcare providers about medical-related questions and the impact of cannabis on health. If you believe you are having a medical emergency, call emergency services. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed herein are those of the authors, presenters, and do not necessarily represent the official views of, nor an endorsement by, the U.S. government, Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, or the government of the state of Missouri.